I ruined my granddaughter's wedding before it ever happened. Not with gossip, not with drama, with one sentence I wasn't supposed to say out loud. Leora was standing in front of the mirror when it happened, sunlight sliding across her shoulders, the dress hanging on her like something that had always belonged to her. She looked peaceful in that dangerous way young women do when they believe love has finished protecting them. I was behind her fixing a seam that didn't need fixing, my hands moving out of habit while my chest tightened for reasons I couldn't ignore. The room smelled like steam and pressed fabric and flowers delivered too early. Everything was beautiful. Everything was calm. That's when I knew it was the wrong moment to stay quiet. I'm Marlo Green, and I raised my granddaughter alone. No husband stepping in, no aunties taking shifts, no safety net, just me learning how to be steady so she could grow without learning fear too early. So when my instincts speak, I don't argue with them. I listen. I've buried enough mistakes to know when silence becomes dangerous. Leora caught my eyes in the mirror and smiled, soft and trusting. That smile almost stopped me. Almost. Her phone buzzed on the vanity. A message from Delphine Carter. Heart emojis, a cheerful reminder about the rehearsal lunch. Delene had been perfect since the day we met her. Pearls, gentle voice, that polished kindness people mistake for character. Churchwomen adored her. The wedding planner deferred to her without being asked. Even strangers smiled when they heard her name, like liking Delphine Carter meant you were part of something respectable. She hugged Leora like ownership disguised as affection. The first time she shook my hand, she held it just a second too long and said, "You did such a beautiful job with her. Beautiful like I'd raised an object." Harold Carter stood behind her, nodding like agreement was his only responsibility. Julian kissed Leora's forehead and thanked me politely. Evan barely looked up from his phone. All of them smooth, all of them calm. That's what made my throat close. I kept pinning, kept my voice steady, watched Leora lean into every message from that family like approval was oxygen. 2 days before a wedding, a girl will excuse anything if it keeps the day intact. I wasn't going to let her walk into something smiling. I didn't shout. I didn't dramatize. I spoke the way you warn someone when a car is already too close. "Listen to me," I said quietly. "Never tell Delene about your inheritance." The air changed, not loudly, not obviously. Leora went still in a way that meant the words landed somewhere real. Her smile stayed in the mirror, but it weakened at the edges like glass under pressure. "Grandma," she said, and I heard it in her tone. "Don't do this now." I leaned closer so fear wouldn't have to travel far. Not your husband, not his mother, not anyone in that family. Not a whisper, not a hint. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "You keep it quiet the way you kept your first heartbreak quiet so you could finish school. You keep it quiet the way you hid your fear when I was sick so I wouldn't worry. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're watching from." Because women who've raised children alone understand the cost of speaking when everyone wants you to be pleasant and grateful. Leora reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Delene's been kind to me," she said carefully, like kindness could cancel warning. She likes things organized. Organized. The word hit me like a memory I never forgot. Organized means paperwork. Organized means control. I kept my face soft because panic spreads fast when elders show it. Kindness can still be dangerous, I told her. Some people don't reach with their hands, they reach with rules. Leora studied my reflection, searching for exaggeration. But why would she? Her phone buzzed again. Delene's name lit the screen. Leora didn't answer. She just stared at it. I covered her hand on the vanity and felt her pulse jump. Her voice dropped low, afraid of the wrong world hearing her. "Grandma," she whispered. "Why?" The first time I learned how paper can bruise you, nobody raised their voice. There was no screaming, no threats, no slammed doors, just soft voices in a living room that smelled like casseroles and lais, and a woman smiling too kindly while she slid a folder toward me as if she were offering comfort. Grief makes you slow. Grief makes you grateful for hands reaching out. That is why it is the perfect time for certain people to do business. It was right after a death in my family. Fresh enough that the air still felt heavy. Fresh enough that everybody kept saying, Let us know if you need anything. Like the words alone could stitch something back together. I was the one holding the keys, the mail, the unanswered calls. I was the one people look to because I've always been the one who stands up when other folks fold. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. I didn't even have the breath for an argument. I had a kitchen table, a stack of bills, and a heart that kept forgetting to beat properly. They arrived mid-morning in a clean car, dressed like church on a weekday. Deline Carter was there, younger than she is now, but already polished, already wearing that pearl softness that makes people relax. Harold was beside her, quiet as a shadow. Evan carried a box like he'd come to help move things. Julian stood back, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor, like he didn't want to be seen wanting anything. Delphine hugged me like we were family and said, "Marlo, we're so sorry. We'll take care of the hard parts for you." She said it with a tone that sounded like a blessing. She didn't ask permission to sit. She simply sat as if comfort made her welcome everywhere. Then she placed the folder down with both hands. Careful, respectful. "This is standard," she said. "It protects you. It protects the family. It keeps everything organized. Organized. That word again." She explained in calm, simple sentences that they'd brought papers to help manage things, to avoid confusion, to make sure no one takes advantage. She spoke like she was saving me from wolves. I remember how badly I wanted to believe her. I remember nodding like a child being taught manners. She pointed to lines with a manicured nail and said, "You don't even need to read every page. It's just formalities. We'll walk you through it." The way she said formalities made my stomach tighten, but grief is strange. Grief makes you doubt your own instincts because everything inside you already feels wrong. I signed one page. I initialed another. I did it because she kept saying, "This is for your peace." I did it because Harold kept nodding slow and steady like a man confirming something respectable. I did it because Evan's eyes were on my hands, not my face. I did it because Julian offered me a glass of water like I was fragile and he was kind. Then the air shifted just slightly when Delphine reached for the folder and tucked it back into her bag. Her smile didn't change, but the warmth behind it thinned. "Good," she said softly, and the word had weight. "Now we can move forward." Later, weeks later, when I could finally stand the sound of my own thoughts, I took a copy of what I'd signed to a woman who works with trusts and deeds for a living. Marian Ellis read the pages without blinking. Her lips tightened as she turned the last sheet. She didn't make me feel stupid, which is how I knew it was bad. She said, "This would have transferred control out of your hands." She said it plain. She said it like a doctor reading an X-ray. She showed me the paragraph where I'd agreed to temporary management that didn't have an end date. She showed me the language that sounded protective but wasn't standard, protective, organized formalities. That day, I learned something that never left me. People don't always steal with violence. Sometimes they steal by making you feel rude for asking questions. I spent months undoing what I'd signed. I spent nights staring at ceilings, wondering how close I came to losing everything I was trying to hold together. I didn't forget Deline's words. I didn't forget the way she smiled while my pen moved. I didn't forget how safe she wanted me to feel. That memory is why 2 days before Leora's wedding, when I heard Delian laugh lightly at the rehearsal lunch and tell the planner, "Don't worry, we like to keep things organized. It's standard in our family." My chest went cold and my hands went still. I didn't raise Leora in wealth. I raised her in carefulness, in making a dollar stretch, in keeping receipts, in speaking softly around people who smile too wide. The kind of upbringing that teaches a child how to be grateful without being gullible. So when people hear 200 million, they picture champagne and cameras and a girl who grew up spoiled. That wasn't us. That number lived behind doors that stayed shut inside paperwork that didn't sit on kitchen counters, wrapped in silence so tight it could have been stitched. The money didn't fall out of the sky, and it didn't come from a lottery. It came from land held for so long it became invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Before Leora was even born, there was acreage tied to our family line plain-looking property that people drove past without slowing down. The kind of land folks call nothing special until somebody with a map and a suit starts asking questions. Over the years, companies began circling it with polite letters and quiet offers. They weren't offering because they loved us. They were offering because they'd found value under the ground rights to minerals and leases that could produce steady money for decades. The kind of value that doesn't announce itself with luxury, but accumulates like pressure. There were lease payments, renewals, royalties that rose when the market shifted. Nobody celebrated it out loud. The first time I heard a number big enough to make my knees weak, I didn't scream. I locked the document in a drawer and sat down in the dark until my breathing slowed. Wealth that arrives quietly is the kind that gets taken quietly too. That's why it was sealed away the way it was. There was a trust set up to hold what the land produced and to protect the person it was meant for. It grew the way a tree grows when you leave it alone, slow at first, then suddenly taller than the roofline. It appreciated over time the way money does when it isn't being drained by emergencies and mistakes. It wasn't sitting in one account with neon lights around it. It was layered and guarded and treated like a legacy, not a trophy. The people around us didn't know because there was no reason for them to know. Leora went to school like everyone else. She worked. She wore the same kind of modest dresses to church. She learned to say no thank you without sounding rude. She learned to keep her joy private. That trust taught her discipline without her even realizing it. I let her live a normal life because normal life protects you. When people think you're ordinary, they don't study you. They don't count your steps. They don't measure your silence. That is the kind of invisibility that keeps a woman safe. Marian Ellis told me years ago in that steady, professional tone she uses when she sees danger coming, that silence is not just personal. Silence can be legal. It can be strategic. It can be the difference between keeping control and handing it away with a smile. She didn't fill my head with big words. She didn't talk down to me. She just said, if anyone outside the trust tries to anchor themselves to this money, it gets messy fast. She said, the mess doesn't start with theft. It starts with access. It starts with assumptions. It starts with a family believing they have rights to things they didn't build. Leora watched how love makes a young woman soften. How a wedding makes people believe everything will be clean and blessed and protected by good intentions. I watched how Deline wrapped herself around Leora like a ribbon, and how that ribbon tightened when nobody was looking. And I knew deep down that the most dangerous part wasn't the money itself. It was the way marriage changes what people feel entitled to ask for. Marriage makes some people behave like a lock has clicked open, even when it hasn't. It makes them believe your private business has become family. It makes them think they can invite themselves into rooms they've never earned. Leora sat on my couch that evening, the rehearsal lunch already behind us, her hair pinned up, her face tired in that quiet way brides get when everyone has been touching them all day. She leaned forward with her hands clasped and said, "Lo, so the inheritance is real. You weren't just warning me because you don't like her." I held her gaze and kept my voice even because the truth has to be steady to be heard. "It's real," I said, "and it's quiet on purpose." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but didn't know which words would come out safe. I didn't give her time to dress it up as romance or ignore it as paranoia. I said it plain with the weight it deserved. "Baby, marriage changes everything. Marriage doesn't just change a woman's last name. It changes how people look at her pockets. It changes what they feel brave enough to ask. It changes what they feel entitled to touch." I watched Leora sit there on my couch, hands folded in her lap like she was trying to keep her own nerves from spilling onto the floor. Outside, Seattle rain tapped the window in a steady rhythm, soft as a warning. Inside, the air felt tight, like the room itself was listening. Leora wasn't scared of the wedding. She was scared of disappointing people. I've seen that kind of fear swallow young women whole. It makes them sign things they don't understand. It makes them smile when they should be quiet. It makes them confuse peace with surrender. I leaned forward and lowered my voice. Not because I feared being overheard, but because truth lands better when it isn't shouted. "There's a window," I told her. "A window right after vows. When people start acting like what's yours has become everybody's business." Leora's eyes narrowed slightly, trying to catch the shape of what I meant. I could see her mind wanting a simple rule. Do this, don't do that, and everything stays safe. Life doesn't work like that. People don't come for money with robbery masks. They come with casseroles. They come with hugs. They come with phrases like family, standard, protection, and we just want what's best. They use love as a key, and marriage makes that key look legitimate. It's not that the law suddenly becomes your enemy when you marry. It's that people start using the idea of marriage to rush you. They talk like time is running out, like paperwork is urgent, like a signature is harmless. They make you feel childish for hesitating. They make you feel rude for asking for a day to think. That's how the mistake happens. Not in a courtroom, in a living room with someone smiling too softly while they slide a pen toward you. Leora shifted on the couch, her fingers pressing into each other. "Julian would never do that," she said. But the words didn't come out strong. They came out careful, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. I didn't argue with her. I didn't insult her husband. I let her keep whatever softness she needed to get through the next 48 hours. I kept my focus where the danger lived. "I'm not telling you he's a monster," I said. "I'm telling you his mother knows how to move when everybody is distracted." Leora's jaw tightened. She looked down at her engagement ring, turning it once like she was checking whether it still fit the same. "I haven't told her anything," she murmured. "Not about the trust, not about the land, nothing." "Good," I said, and the relief in my chest felt like a small mercy. Keep it that way. Silence is not just the absence of speech. Silence is control. Silence is choice. Silence is a locked door. When you speak too early, you don't just give information. You give people time to plan. You give them time to consult. You give them time to shape an approach that looks respectful while it corners you. That's why I warned her before the wedding and not after. After is too late. "After you're already playing defense," Leora swallowed. And I saw the bride in her trying to rise. The part of her that wanted to be gracious. The part that wanted to keep the peace at all costs. "Deline keeps calling me our girl," she said softly, almost embarrassed. "She says it like she's proud." I nodded once. "That's not pride," I said. "That's practice." I could feel Leora bristle, then settle, then bristle again. Watching her wrestle with it broke my heart in a quiet way because I knew that moment when love and instinct pull in opposite directions. It's the moment a woman either learns to protect herself or learns to explain away red flags until they turn into bruises. I reached over and covered her hand with mine, not squeezing, just anchoring. "You don't have to fight anyone," I told her. "You don't have to accuse. You don't have to ruin your wedding with fear." Her eyes lifted to mine, wide and wet, but steady. "Then what do I do?" she whispered. I held her gaze until she stopped looking for comfort and started looking for instruction. "You do nothing," I said. "You stay quiet. You let them show you who they are." Leora's breathing hitched slightly, and in that hitch, I heard her understanding start to form. I leaned closer the way I used to when she was a child, and the world outside was too loud. "And listen to me," I said slow and clear, planting the words where she couldn't forget them. "If anyone comes with papers after the wedding, I didn't understand Delphine Carter's motive the way people understand villains in movies. One big confession, one ugly outburst, one moment where the mask slips and everyone gasps. Delphine didn't move like that. Deline moved like a woman who believes she is doing what is proper. She hid greed inside words that sounded like values. She wrapped control in manners so tight you could mistake it for love. That's why people admired her. That's why women at church whispered, 'That family has class,' as if class means kindness. I watched her long enough to learn she wasn't chasing money like a desperate person. She was collecting it like it belonged to her by design. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private room with warm lighting and linen napkins folded like swans. Leora sat beside Julian, smiling the smile a bride learns to wear when she's been hugged too many times in one night. Deline sat across from them, perfectly angled, her voice carrying just enough to draw laughter without ever sounding loud. Harold stayed beside her like a seal of approval. Evans scrolled and smirked at whatever was on his screen, chiming in only when Deline glanced at him. It looked like a happy family from the outside. Balanced, respectable, easy. But I've lived too long to trust what people arrange for strangers to see. Deline didn't ask Leora how she felt. She asked how the seating chart was going. She didn't ask what kind of marriage they wanted. She talked about keeping things aligned and starting off right. Her words kept landing on the same places. Order, structure, standards, family. Every sentence was a small fence, and in the middle of that fence was my granddaughter, bright-eyed and trying to be gracious. Deline leaned forward at one point, her fork resting on the edge of her plate like she was pausing to share wisdom. "Marriage is a joining," she said, smiling at the planner. Then at Leora, then at me, as if including me made it kinder. Not just hearts, assets, responsibilities, everything. People forget that. We don't forget that in this family. The way she said in this family made it sound like membership came with obligations. Like a young bride's individuality was something to be softened down, blended, made useful. Leora laughed politely. Julian nodded the way he always did when his mother spoke. Automatic trained. I watched him. Watched how his face stayed pleasant, even when his eyes looked elsewhere. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He let her lead the atmosphere. Let her set the tone. That told me everything about what she was used to. After the meal, while people stood and mingled, Delphine drifted toward Leora with the gentle determination of someone who had already decided where she belonged. "Sweetheart," she said, touching Leora's wrist lightly. "After the wedding, we'll do a little family follow-up. Nothing heavy, just a quick sit-down so we can make sure you two are protected." Protected. The word was soft, almost loving. It was also a weapon. Leora's shoulders lifted. A reflex, then relaxed. "A follow-up," she repeated, still smiling. "Because that is what brides do when they don't want to look ungrateful." Deline nodded with warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Just standard," she said. "It'll put your mind at ease. The first day after you marry, everything feels new and fast. It's better to get the formalities out of the way right away. Then you can just enjoy being married." Formalities? Standard. Right away, the phrases clicked into place like familiar stones under my feet. I didn't need to guess her motive anymore. Deline believed marriage turned a woman's private life into public territory. She believed the moment vows were spoken, family became a boardroom. I could hear it in the way she spoke of protection, like protection meant control, and control meant entitlement. She wasn't waiting to see what Leora offered. She was preparing to take what she assumed was now within reach, and she assumed it would be easy because she'd done it before. I saw it in the confidence, in the comfort with which she referenced paperwork like it was tradition, the way Harold nodded as if he'd watched it happen more than once, the way Evan smirked bored like the outcome was already known. Youth plus love makes people compliant. Deline was counting on that. She was counting on the softness that follows a wedding day. She was counting on my granddaughter wanting to keep peace more than she wanted to keep power. Leora glanced at me across the room, her smile still in place, but her eyes asking for instruction without moving her lips. I held her gaze and gave her the smallest shake of my head. Don't agree to anything, not even politely. Deline noticed that glance. Her smile sharpened just for a second, then softened again as she squeezed Leora's wrist. We'll call you, she said sweetly. Just a quick family follow-up after the wedding. The wedding was beautiful in the way money and intention can make things beautiful. Clean lines, soft lighting, music that moved like water through the room. White flowers climbed the walls of the venue as if they'd grown there naturally, and every chair was set just so, angled toward the altar like it was all leaning in to witness something sacred. People smiled easily that day, the kind of smiles that come from believing everything important has already been settled. Leora walked toward Julian with a calm grace that made my chest tighten, her dress moving around her like it knew how hard she'd worked to get here. I watched her face, not for nerves, but for doubt. There was none. Just trust. That's what love gives you on your wedding day. A soft place to stand. Deline sat in the front row, hands folded, chin lifted, tears placed perfectly at the corners of her eyes. She dabbed them gently like she was performing grief for an audience that expected it. Harold leaned in and whispered something that made her smile without looking away from the aisle. Evan glanced around, already bored. Julian waited at the front, hands clasped, posture straight, looking like a man who'd been taught where to stand and when to nod. When Deline reached out to straighten his jacket before the ceremony began, he led her. He always led her. That's what struck me most. Not cruelty, not force, just permission. The ceremony unfolded smoothly, vows spoken clearly, promises made with steady voices. Applause followed like a wave, and for a moment, even I felt the pull of it. The relief that comes when something you've been holding your breath over finally lands. Leora smiled at me as they turned to walk back down the aisle, her eyes shining, and I smiled back because I am her grandmother. And love doesn't disappear just because instinct whispers caution. The reception flowed the way these things always do. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. People hugged Leora like she belonged to them now, like marriage had made her communal property. Deline moved through the room with ease, greeting guests, accepting compliments, narrating the family's happiness like a host who'd rehearsed her lines. She kept one hand on Julian's arm whenever she passed him, grounding him where she wanted him. He never pulled away. He never stepped ahead. When she spoke, he listened. When she laughed, he smiled. When she suggested something to the planner, he nodded without question. I watched all of it from the edge of the room, the way women my age learn to watch quietly without demanding attention. At one point, Deline crossed toward the gift table, her purse tucked under her arm. It wasn't large, but it was structured, heavier than it needed to be for lipstick and a phone. She set it down briefly to greet someone, and when she shifted it, the top gaped just enough for me to see inside. Not cash, not personal effects. Paper, thick, neatly stacked, edges aligned. A folder pressed flat against the side, the corner stiff and unmistakable. My heart didn't race. It slowed. This is what calm looks like when you've been warned before, when you recognize a pattern instead of reacting to it. Delphine closed the bag quickly and resumed smiling, but the weight of what I'd seen stayed with me. Across the room, Leora danced with Julian, her head resting against his shoulder, his hand firm at her back. They looked happy. Truly, that's the cruelest part of moments like this. The danger doesn't arrive dressed as danger. It arrives wrapped in celebration. Later, when speeches began, Deline stood and lifted her glass, her voice warm and steady as she spoke about family, about unity, about how marriage joins not just two people, but two legacies. The word legacy hung in the air a second longer than it needed to. Leora didn't notice. Julian squeezed his mother's hand afterward, gratitude written all over his face. He didn't look toward me once. As the night wound down, guests filtered out with hugs and laughter, shoes in their hands, promises to call. The lights dimmed, the music softened. Leora hugged me tightly, whispering thank you into my shoulder, the scent of flowers and perfume clinging to her hair. Deline watched us from across the room, her smile settled, satisfied. When the doors finally closed behind the last guest, the room felt suddenly too quiet, like a house after company leaves and the real conversations begin. The morning after the wedding didn't feel like danger. It felt like leftovers and soft light and a quiet kind of tiredness that sits behind your eyes after you've smiled for 12 hours straight. Leora and Julian had stayed in a downtown hotel suite for the night. Deline's gift, of course, arranged with the same graceful control she used for everything. But Leora came by my place early, still in that newlywed glow, hair pulled into a loose knot, carrying her shoes in her hand like a girl again. She said she wanted breakfast with Grandma, just something small before she went back to Julian for the brunch his family had planned. Planned. That word kept showing up in my mind like a light that wouldn't turn off. Leora sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. She looked peaceful. That peace is what made my stomach hurt, because peace is exactly what predators borrow when they want you to lower your guard. I watched her thumb the edge of her napkin, watched how she kept smiling even when her phone buzzed. Deline again. Leora didn't answer. She let it ring out and said almost apologetic. She's excited. She was trying to be generous. Brides do that. They think if they keep being sweet, everybody will stay sweet back. I set a plate of eggs and toast in front of her and sat down across from her, careful with my own movements. I didn't want to scare her. I wanted to sharpen her. "You remember what I told you?" I said quietly. Leora's smile stayed, but her eyes shifted. "One of those small changes that means your body heard the warning even if your heart wants to ignore it," I remember she murmured. "I haven't said anything." "Good," I said again. That word tasted like relief and dread at the same time, because silence doesn't stop people from trying. Silence just makes them show their hand faster when they're desperate. I didn't have to guess why Deline would move quickly. I'd watched women like her my whole life. They don't wait for permission when they believe they have a right. And marriage gives people like that a fresh excuse to rush you. In their minds, the first day after vows is when everything is easiest. You're still tender, still floating, still trying to keep the new peace intact. You haven't had time to think. You haven't had time to ask anyone outside the family what something means. They bank on that. They bank on a bride's fear of looking distrustful. They bank on a husband's reluctance to challenge his mother when the ink on the marriage license hasn't even dried. Leora pushed her plate away after a few bites, appetite fading the way it does when something in the air changes. Julian said his mom likes to handle details, she said, repeating it like a compliment, then pausing as if the words sounded different out loud. She said she wants us to start off organized. Organized. I felt my jaw tighten just slightly. Starting off organized, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. The way you keep a knife hidden behind your back. That's what she said. Leora nodded. She said she doesn't want anything to be confusing later. Confusing later? Another phrase that always shows up right before someone tells you to sign something fast. I leaned back in my chair and let my gaze settle somewhere past Leora's shoulder because I didn't want her to see too much in my face. The truth is, I already knew the logic of what Deline was planning, even if I didn't know the exact document yet. People like Deline don't come with lawyers first. Lawyers invite questions. Lawyers create paper trails. That can be challenged. Lawyers make things formal in a way that gives the other side time to breathe. Deline didn't want breathing room. She wanted speed. She wanted pressure without debate. That's why she would choose a notary. A notary doesn't sit down to explain. A notary shows up, smiles politely, checks an ID, and waits for signatures. The presence alone makes people feel like the decision has already been made. Like refusing would be childish or rude, like saying, "I need time," would be embarrassing. A notary is quick authority, just enough to scare compliance, not enough to invite conversation. I had seen it before. People bring a notary the way they bring witnesses, to make you feel outnumbered, to make you feel like the room agrees with them, to make your hesitation look like troublemaking. And the first 24 to 72 hours after marriage is when that trick works best, because a bride is still trying to prove she belongs. Leora's fingers tightened around her teacup. "Grandma," she said softly, voice smaller than it had been yesterday. "You think she's going to bring paperwork?" I met her eyes then, steady and calm. "I think she's going to bring something that looks harmless," I said. "And I think she's going to rush you." Leora swallowed. And for the first time since she walked in, she didn't look like a bride. She looked like a granddaughter again, young, trusting, trying to learn how to stand up without shaking. I reached across the table and covered her hand. "If anyone asks you to sign anything right now," I said slow and clear, "you don't sign, you don't explain, you don't argue, you just say you need time." She nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she could already feel the pressure coming. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the quiet. Outside, the hallway was still. Then, sharp and sudden, the doorbell rang. The second I opened my door, I knew it wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a delivery. It wasn't even family coming to coo over a newlywed the way people pretend to do when they want to feel close to happiness. It was a formation. Deline stood in the front like she owned the hallway, pearls catching the light, smile already fixed in place. Harold was beside her, hands clasped, eyes calm. Evan leaned slightly back, phone in hand, watching like this was entertainment. Julian stood near the edge of them, not quite in front, not quite behind. Dressed down now but still neat, like he'd been told what to wear to look reasonable. And next to them was a man I had never seen before, holding a leather folder like it carried scripture. His posture was polite, his face was neutral, the kind of neutral that pretends it's not participating in the harm. Deline's gaze slid past me, straight to Leora behind my shoulder, as if my body was just an obstacle. "Good morning," she sang warm and practiced. "We didn't want to bother you, but we were already nearby. Already nearby." People always say that when they don't want you to realize they planned it. Leora stepped up beside me, still holding her teacup like she'd forgotten to put it down. Her eyes went to the folder in the stranger's hands, then back to Delene's smile. I felt her arm brush mine, the smallest tremor in her skin. Delene opened her palms. "Sweetheart, this will take 5 minutes," she said, and the sweetness in her voice made my stomach tighten because it wasn't meant to comfort Leora. It was meant to calm the room. "This is just a formality." The man cleared his throat. Respectful. "Calvin H. Brooks," he said, offering a small professional nod. "I'm a notary." His voice carried that familiar tone of public service, calm, certain, unbothered. Delphine turned slightly toward him as if presenting him like a gift. "We use Mr. Brooks for family matters," she said. "He's very reliable." Reliable? Another word that lands like a pillow over your mouth. Harold gave a slow nod. Silent agreement. Julian didn't look at Leora. He looked at the wall across from my door like eye contact would make him responsible. Leora's fingers tightened around her cup. "What is this?" she asked quietly. Delphine laughed softly, as if Leora had asked something cute. "Oh, honey," she said, stepping forward. The scent of her perfume hit first expensive, clean. "Too close. It's post-marital protection routine. Every family has their way of starting off right. We just like to make sure our children are covered," she said. Our children and I watched Leora's face do that small thing where a young woman warms at the idea of belonging. Delene knew exactly where to press. The notary shifted his folder into his left arm and reached for a small pad tucked under it. It wasn't dramatic. It was casual, like he'd done this 1,000 times in kitchens and living rooms, while people nodded and smiled through their own confusion. Delphine walked in without waiting for an invitation, heels clicking softly on my floor. Harold followed. Evan drifted in last. Julian stepped over the threshold like he was stepping into a church. "Let's sit," Delene said, already moving toward my dining table, as if the house had always been hers to arrange. My table, where Leora had eaten breakfast 20 minutes earlier, suddenly looked like a negotiation room. Delene set a thick stack of papers down with confidence, smoothing the top page with her palm. The sound of paper against wood landed heavy in the silence. Leora stood at the edge of the room, cup still in her hand, blinking slowly like her body was trying to catch up to the moment. I didn't speak yet. I watched. I watched how Delene positioned the papers in front of Leora's chair, not mine. I watched how Harold stood at Delene's shoulder like a witness. I watched how Evan leaned against the counter, mouth curling at the corners. I watched Julian hover near Leora's side, but not close enough to protect her. Delphi's smile widened. "Now that the marriage is legal, we just need your signature." Acknowledging shared marital assets and spousal beneficiaries. The sentence came out smooth, like she'd practiced it in the mirror, like it wasn't a trap, just a tradition. Leora's breath caught small, quick. She set her cup down on the counter with shaking care and walked to the table because politeness is a leash, and she'd been trained her whole life to keep it on. Calvin Brooks opened his folder and pulled out his stamp and a small ink pad, setting them down with neat precision. The sight of that stamp made everything feel final in a way that didn't belong in a home. Delene slid the top page forward, tapping the signature line with one nail. "Just here, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice lowering into something almost maternal. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a pen like she'd brought it specifically for this moment, and placed it directly in front of Leora. The pen sat there like bait, small, ordinary, pretending it wasn't sharp. Leora stared at it a moment too long, and Delene noticed. Delene always noticed. She shifted her voice into something softer, almost affectionate. The way women do when they want to guide you without looking like they're pushing. "Sweetheart," she murmured. Palm resting lightly on the paper as if she were studying it for Leora's benefit. This is how grown people protect what they're building. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Those words are designed to make you feel silly for hesitating. Harold added a quiet, fatherly tone without moving much. "It's just a safeguard," he said. "You two are starting a life. You'll thank us later." Evan chuckled under his breath like the whole thing was obvious. "Everybody does this," he said, tapping his phone screen once and sliding it back into his pocket. "It's standard. Standard. The word floated through my dining room like smoke. Leora's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She didn't reach for the pen. She didn't push it away either. She looked at Julian, her husband, now waiting for his eyes to meet hers, waiting for him to say something that would let her breathe. Julian's gaze flicked down to the paper and then away again, landing somewhere near the corner of the room as if the wall might save him from choosing sides. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers interlaced tight, his jaw working slowly like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. Deline glanced at him and he nodded small automatic. That nod was louder than any words he could have spoken. Leora's shoulders lifted slightly, then settled as if her body had just accepted a new truth without wanting to. Deline seized that moment. She leaned forward with the gentle authority of a woman used to being obeyed. "It's just paperwork," she said. "You're not giving anything away. You're simply acknowledging what marriage already means." She said already means like the meaning had been decided by someone older, someone wiser, someone who didn't need permission. Calvin Brooks, the notary, cleared his throat lightly, professional and careful. "Ma'am," he said to Leora, "this is a straightforward signing. I'll just need to verify your ID and witness your signature. Straightforward." Another word meant to smooth your instincts flat. Leora's eyes darted to me for half a second, quick as a blink, then back to the paper. She was trying to stay composed. She was trying not to offend. She was trying to be the good new wife Deline kept praising her for being. That's why they were so sure. They were sure because they believed they understood her. They believed she would choose peace over power, even in her own home. They believed gratitude would trap her. They believed love would make her pliable. They believed her age meant she didn't know how to say no without apologizing. Deline's smile widened, the warmth in it turning almost triumphant. "We're only doing this because we care," she said, as if care is proven by urgency. "And we're doing it now because it's better not to wait. When people wait, they get confused. They start listening to outsiders." "Outs?" She meant me without saying my name. Harold stepped closer, his shadow falling over the table like weight. "No need to make this bigger than it is," he said gently, and the gentleness felt like a warning. Evan tilted his head toward Leora and added, "Light and careless. Come on, don't be dramatic. This is normal. Normal." Another leash. Leora's lips parted. She looked like she wanted to speak but didn't know which sentence would keep everyone calm. Her fingers hovered near the pen, trembling just slightly, the way a hand trembles when it's about to do something the mind hasn't agreed to yet. Julian shifted his weight from one foot to the other, still silent, still absent in the one moment his presence mattered most. Deline noticed Leora's hesitation and changed tactics in a heartbeat, her voice turning sweet again. "You're tired," she cooed. "You've had a big week. Just sign, sweetheart. Then we'll go. You can rest. You don't want to start your marriage with conflict." Conflict. There it was. The threat wrapped in a lullaby. Start your marriage with conflict. As if refusing to sign something you don't understand is what creates conflict, not the people who arrived at your door with a notary and a stack of papers. Leora's hand moved an inch closer to the pen. Her breathing went shallow. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. She was trying so hard to be good. Deline watched that effort like a hunter watches a limping deer. The room held its breath. The only sound was the faint scrape of Calvin's folder shifting as he prepared to witness the signature. And that's when I felt something settle inside me. Quiet, heavy, final. I stepped forward close enough that Leora could feel my presence without me touching her. And I spoke for the first time. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It came out low, and even the way a woman speaks when she's done being impressed by polite faces. "Before she signs anything," I said, "I need one thing clarified." Deline's smile stayed on her mouth, but her eyes narrowed a fraction, quick as a blink. She turned toward me as if I had just stepped into traffic in front of her. "Marlo," she said softly, warning wrapped in velvet. "This really isn't necessary." I didn't answer her yet. I looked past her, past Harold's calm posture, past Evan's smirk, past Julian's silence, and I fixed my eyes on Calvin Brooks. A notary's power isn't loud, but it's real. It's the power of being the person everyone pretends is neutral. Neutral people become dangerous when they're used as furniture in somebody else's plan. Mr. Brooks, I said, respectful but firm. Which trust are you referencing? The question landed heavy because it didn't match the script they'd brought into my home. Deline blinked once slow, her smile tightening as if she were deciding whether to laugh at me or crush me. Harold shifted his stance slightly. Evan's smirk faltered and then returned forced. Julian's eyes flicked to me, startled, then dropped again. Calvin hesitated only a beat, the way professionals do when they realize a room is changing. "Ma'am," he said, still polite, "the documents reference the Green Family Trust." He said it confidently, like reading a label, like naming something makes it yours. Leora's breath caught, her head turned toward me slowly, eyes wide, and in that wide look I saw fear and hope fighting for space. Deline's chin lifted. "Exactly," she said, a touch sharper now. "We're simply ensuring everything is acknowledged properly. This is all very standard." Standard. She tried to push the room back into the familiar groove, tried to make my question feel like an inconvenience. I didn't give her that. I kept my gaze on Calvin because the truth was not in Deline's mouth. It was in the paperwork. "Thank you," I said to him. Then I turned my eyes to Deline. That trust ended yesterday. The air changed instantly, not in a dramatic way. No one screamed. No one dropped a glass. It was more subtle than that. More human. Evan's eyebrows lifted before he could control his face. Harold's nostrils flared slightly, the smallest flash of irritation. Julian's lips parted as if he was about to speak, but no sound came out. Deline froze for half a second, and in that half a second her smile became something else too fixed, too thin, like a mask pulled tight over a crack. "That's not." She started, then stopped, recalibrating. "Marlo, you don't understand what you're saying." Her voice sharpened at the edges, just enough to try to put me back in my place. I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue. I let my calm do the talking. "I understand exactly," I said, and my words landed with the quiet certainty of someone who has been prepared for this moment long before the doorbell rang. Leora's chair scraped softly as she shifted, instinctively pulling back from the table like the paper might bite her. Calvin's eyes moved to the first page again. Deline noticed and leaned forward quickly, her hand pressing down on the stack as if she could hold reality in place with her palm. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice sweetening again in a hurry. "It's fine. Everything is in order. We've done this before. Done this before." There it was, her truth slipping out. Calvin didn't respond to that. He picked up the top sheet, then the second, his thumb moving along the corners with practiced care. He wasn't judging the family. He was judging his own risk. I watched him closely because the moment a neutral man starts feeling liability, the whole room loses its certainty. "Ma'am," he said slowly, looking up at me, "can you explain what you mean by ended?" Delphi's head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. I answered calmly, "Not for Deline, not for Harold, not for Evan, not even for Julian." I answered for Leora, who needed to hear that her fear had a reason, and her silence had been protection. "I mean, the documents you're holding are anchored to something that no longer applies," I said. "And if you proceed without verifying, you put your stamp on the wrong thing." Deline inhaled sharply through her nose, the sound controlled, furious. Harold's hand moved to her elbow, steadying her, reminding her to stay composed. Evan's phone was forgotten in his pocket now. Julian stared at the papers like they were suddenly written in a language he couldn't pretend not to see. Calvin lowered his gaze again, flipping to the section with headings and names, scanning the lines more carefully. Now, the room had lost its smoothness. The confidence that walked in with them was slipping page by page right there on my dining table. Calvin's brow furrowed slightly. He turned back to the first page, then to the second again, slower this time, and began to reread. The room stayed quiet while Calvin Brooks reread the pages, the silence thick enough to feel like pressure on my ears. He didn't rush this time. He slowed down, the way people do when they realize their first confidence might cost them later. His finger traced a line, then paused. He flipped a page back, then forward again. The sound of paper turning felt louder than it should have been, like it was echoing off everyone's nerves. Deline shifted beside the table, her heel tapping once before she caught herself. Harold leaned in slightly, trying to read over Calvin's shoulder without looking like he was trying. Evan crossed his arms, the smirk gone now, replaced by impatience. Julian stood frozen, eyes fixed on the folder like it might explain something he hadn't bothered to understand before today. Leora hadn't moved at all. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, knuckles pale, breathing shallow but steady. She was listening. That mattered. Calvin cleared his throat. "There's a section here," he said carefully, tapping the page that references a successor structure activated upon marriage. Deli's lips parted, then pressed together again. "Yes," she said quickly. "That's standard." She leaned forward. "Too fast. It just means things are updated." Calvin didn't look at her. He kept reading. "It appears," he continued, voice still professional, but no longer casual, "that upon marriage, the original trust dissolves and a new trust takes effect." Leora's head tilted slightly, as if her body understood before her mind did. I watched Deline's shoulders tighten under her jacket. "Dissolves." Harold repeated, quiet but sharp. Calvin nodded once. "That's the language used here." He glanced up briefly, then backed down. "The new trust is more restrictive." Restrictive? That word landed hard. Deline let out a small laugh that sounded wrong in the room. "Restrictive? How?" she asked, sweetness strained. Calvin turned another page. "It explicitly limits beneficiaries." He paused, reading silently for a moment longer than necessary. The delay was deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Spouses are excluded. In-laws are excluded." The air left Deline's chest in a controlled exhale she didn't mean to make. Harold straightened fully now, irritation creeping into his posture. Evan's arms dropped to his sides. Julian finally looked at Leora, his face pale, confusion written all over him. Leora didn't look back. She was staring at Calvin, absorbing each word like it was anchoring her. Deline tried to recover. "That can't be right," she said firmly. "We were told." She stopped herself, eyes flicking to me, then back to Calvin. "This is just an acknowledgement. No one is taking anything." Calvin adjusted his glasses. "There's also a clause regarding coercion," he said, quieter now. The room leaned in without meaning to. "It states that any attempt to compel, pressure, or rush the beneficiary into altering, acknowledging, or assigning interests triggers an immediate forfeit of any future claims." Leora inhaled sharply, a sound caught between shock and relief. Julian took a half step toward her, then stopped as if unsure whether he was allowed to cross that space anymore. Deline's face hardened. "Forfeiter?" she repeated, the words scraping her throat. Calvin nodded again. "Yes, ma'am." He looked up fully now, meeting her eyes for the first time, which means that proceeding without proper verification could expose all parties involved. He didn't say consequences. He didn't need to. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer, the table heavier with paper that no longer belonged to Deline's confidence. I watched her carefully. This was the moment people reveal who they are when politeness stops working. Her smile didn't return. Instead, she pressed her lips together and looked at Leora, her gaze sharp, searching for weakness. "You knew about this," she said, accusation thinly veiled. Leora didn't answer her. She didn't have to. The truth was sitting right there in black ink. Harold muttered something under his breath. Evan stepped back toward the door, instinctively distancing himself from whatever this had become. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again, finally understanding that silence had been a choice, and choices have consequences. Calvin stacked the pages neatly, aligning the corners with deliberate care. He slid the pen back toward his folder instead of toward Leora. Then, with a calm that carried finality, he closed the folder and snapped it shut. Calvin Brooks didn't slam the folder. He didn't stand up in anger. He didn't raise his voice or accuse anyone of anything. He simply closed his work the way a man closes a door when he senses smoke. Quietly, carefully, Completely. That was the moment Delene's control began to slip because she had built her whole entrance on the assumption that he would be a prop in neutral, silent, obedient, a stamp with a pulse. But neutrality has limits when it starts to feel expensive. Calvin slid the folder toward himself and began packing his ink pad and stamp with slow precision. The movement was small, but it changed the room's temperature. Leora's shoulders loosened a fraction like her body had been bracing for a hit and realized it might not land. Julian's face tightened, his eyes moving between his mother and the notary, as if he was watching the ground shift under his feet. Harold leaned forward, voice low, trying to regain the tone of a man who runs things. "Now hold on," he said. "We're not asking you to do anything improper. This is family paperwork. Family paperwork." The phrase sounded ridiculous now, floating over a forfeiture clause like a paper boat on deep water. Calvin lifted his gaze, polite but firm. "Sir, I'm not here to interpret intent," he said. "I'm here to witness signatures under appropriate circumstances." Appropriate circumstances. Delphine's smile tried to return and failed. She stepped closer to the table, palm hovering over the papers like she might physically stop the situation from shifting. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice smoothing itself in a hurry. "I don't understand why you're making this complicated. We do this all the time. You've notarized documents for us before." The edge of her desperation showed in that last sentence. "Before you were useful. Before you didn't question. Before you played your role." Calvin didn't flinch at her tone. He only glanced down at the page again, then up at Leora, then back to Delene. His choice wasn't emotional. It was practical. "Ma'am," he said, "the document references a trust structure that appears to have changed, and there is language here regarding coercion and forfeit. If I witness signatures under pressure, I place myself at risk." At risk? That was the real truth, not morality, not loyalty, liability. Delene's nostrils flared, her face tightening as she tried to keep her anger from showing. "Pressure?" she repeated with a laugh that didn't sound like laughter. "No one is pressuring her." Evan made a short sound in his throat, a dismissive scoff meant to signal agreement, but he didn't step forward. He didn't back her up with anything real. Harold's jaw worked slowly. Julian still said nothing. Leora looked down at the pen, then up at me, then back to Calvin. Her eyes were clear now. The softness that had made her easy to corner was evaporating in real time. Delene saw that, and her voice sharpened. "Leora," she said, using my granddaughter's name like a hook. "This is a simple process. Sign the acknowledgement and we're done. You don't want to start your marriage with suspicion." Suspicion. The word slid out like blame, like the problem was Leora's instincts, not Deli's ambush. Leora's lips parted, then closed again. She didn't defend herself. She didn't apologize. She held her silence in a way that looked new on her heavy, deliberate. That silence rattled Delphine more than any argument could have. Calvin finished packing his stamp and placed it back into his folder. He stood then, pushing his chair back gently. The chair leg scraped the floor, a sound that cut through the room like a signal. "I'm going to have to withdraw from this signing," he said. His tone remained professional but final. "I cannot proceed unless I have confirmation that the reference trust structure and beneficiary terms are current and that all parties are signing voluntarily without coercion." Delene's composure cracked. It wasn't dramatic, but it was visible the way her shoulders tensed, the way her mouth tightened, the way the warmth in her face drained into something colder. "So, you're just leaving?" she demanded, and the demand revealed what the sweetness had been hiding. She wasn't requesting anything. She was expecting obedience. Harold stepped forward, trying to manage his wife's tone with his presence. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "we hired you." Calvin nodded slightly. "And I'm declining to complete this work under these circumstances," he replied. "I'll refund any fee already paid." That last line landed like a slap because it wasn't just refusal. It was rejection. He was refusing their authority. Delene's eyes flashed. She turned sharply toward Julian. "Say something," she hissed. Too low for a stranger to catch, but too sharp for a wife not to feel. Julian's throat moved. He looked at Leora like he wanted her to save him. Leora didn't move. She just stood there quiet, watching the man who'd been brought to force her comply choose himself instead. Deline turned back to Calvin, her voice rising, the politeness finally dropping off. What does this mean for us? Deline's question hung in the air like a demand for mercy. But Calvin Brooks didn't give her comfort. He gave her boundaries. It means I'm not proceeding, he said, calm as a closed gate. If you have questions about what the document means for you, you'll need to speak with counsel. He didn't say lawyer. He didn't have to. The word counsel landed like a cold cloth on a fever. Deline's mouth opened, then shut. Harold's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Evan shifted again toward the doorway, as if his body knew the safest place in a collapsing room is near an exit. Julian looked like a man waking up inside a mess he didn't build, but didn't stop. Leora stood very still, eyes fixed on Deline now, studying her the way you study an animal that has just bared its teeth. Calvin picked up his folder and stepped back toward the door. He nodded once at Leora, then at me. Not solidarity, professional courtesy, but it felt like protection anyway because he was leaving with his stamp. And without that stamp, Delphine's little performance didn't have teeth. Deline followed him 2 steps, anger and panic, battling in her posture. You can't just walk out, she snapped and then softened quickly, voice slipping back into sweetness like she was pulling on a coat. Mr. Brooks, please. We're just trying to protect them. Calvin didn't stop. He opened my front door and stepped into the hallway. The click of the latch as it closed behind him was quiet, but it cut the room in half. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Deline turned slowly. The way people turn when they're about to pretend nothing happened. Her smile tried to come back. It couldn't find its place. Well, she said, forcing a light tone that didn't match her eyes that was inconvenient. Harold gave a short laugh, sharp and humorless. Evan muttered, waste of time. As if time was the only thing they'd risked. Julian stepped toward Leora at last, reaching for her hand like a man trying to restore normal. Leora didn't take it. The rejection was so simple it made my throat tighten. Julian's hand hung in the air for a second too long before he let it drop. Deline's gaze cut to Leora. Sweetheart, she said, voice turning syrupy again. Don't let that man's nervousness scare you. We can finish this later. It's still the right thing to do. Later. That word was supposed to soothe. It only confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't done. She had simply lost the tool she'd brought to force compliance. I watched Leora's face. The softness was gone now. In its place was something new. Quiet calculation. The first layer of steel that forms when a woman realizes she's been handled. Leora walked to the table and picked up the stack of papers with both hands. Deline's eyes widened. Careful, she said quickly. Those are important. Leora didn't look at her. She flipped to the section Calvin had been reading, scanning with the focus of someone who suddenly understands that words can be weapons. Her lips moved silently as she read. Then she turned the pages again, quicker now, and stopped at a paragraph that made her eyebrows lift. I saw her breath hitch, not panic, recognition. The kind of recognition that makes you realize this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Leora set the papers down slowly as if they were dirty. You came here, she said, voice low, controlled. The day after my wedding. Deline lifted her chin, trying to regain authority. Yes, she replied briskly, because it's responsible. Leora's gaze didn't move. You brought a notary. Deline's smile flickered. Yes, she said again, slower, as if she could still frame it as kindness. Leora's voice stayed quiet, but the room leaned toward it anyway. And you did all of that without telling me ahead of time. Julian finally spoke, a weak attempt to patch the moment. Babe, it's just paperwork. My mom, stop. Leora cut in, and the word landed hard because it wasn't shouted. Julian froze. I watched him shrink a fraction, startled by her tone. Deline's eyes flashed at Julian like, how dare you let her speak to you like that? Leora turned her gaze to him, and when she spoke again, her voice shook just slightly, not from fear, but from a grief she hadn't expected to feel this soon. You stood there, she said, and you let them corner me." Julian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. My granddaughter reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't dial anyone. She didn't announce anything. She simply unlocked it and stared at the screen for a long second, thumb hovering. Delene's posture stiffened, her instinct sensing danger. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Leora looked up at me then, not at Delene, not at Harold, not at Evan, and definitely not at her husband. Her eyes were wet but clear. "Grandma," she whispered, voice breaking in one small place. "What if I married into the wrong family?" I didn't answer Leora in front of them, not Delene with her tight mouth and hungry eyes. Not Harold standing stiff like a man who didn't know whether to threaten or retreat. Not Evan hovering near my doorway like a boy caught stealing. Not Julian. Pale and silent, looking at his wife like he just realized she was a person and not a role. In front of people like that, words become tools. They twist. So I moved my body instead. I stepped between Leora and that table, picked up the stack of papers with 2 fingers like something contaminated, and slid them back toward Delene without ceremony. Then I nodded toward my hallway. "Leora," I said quietly, "come with me." My granddaughter hesitated only a second. That second told me she was already changing. She followed me down the hall, past framed photos of her as a little girl, past the small scuff on the wall she made with her bicycle handle years ago, past all the proof that our life existed before the Carters decided it was theirs to organize. I closed my bedroom door behind us and leaned my back against it, keeping my voice low, even though we were alone. Leora stood in the middle of the room like she didn't know where to put her hands. She took one breath, then another, and the tears that had been waiting in her eyes finally slid down. She wiped them fast, angry with herself for crying, angry with the timing, angry that her wedding glow had been replaced by this. "I felt stupid," she whispered, voice raw. "I felt like I was being tested." I shook my head once slow. "You were being measured," I said. "They came to see how easily you fold." Leora's chest rose and fell quickly. She pressed her palms together, fingers interlaced so tight her knuckles looked white. "Julian didn't say anything," she said, and the hurt in her voice was sharper than any insult. "He just stood there and watched me. I didn't defend him. I didn't condemn him. I let the truth sit where it belonged." "People show you who they are when their comfort is threatened," I said softly. Leora's eyes closed briefly, like she was replaying the moment. The pen, the paper, Delene's voice telling her conflict was the problem. When she opened her eyes again, they were clearer, still wet, but focused. "Grandma," she said, swallowing hard. "If I had told her, if I had mentioned the inheritance just once, would she have come differently?" That was the question underneath everything. Not just what happened today, the shape of what could have happened, the danger she avoided without knowing the full size of it. I walked to my dresser and pulled open the bottom drawer where I keep things I don't want laying around. I didn't pull out documents. I didn't pull out numbers. I pulled out something simpler, an old envelope thick with copies and notes from the time Delene tried to help years ago. Leora watched it like it was a snake. "This is why I warned you," I said, setting it on the bed between us. "Because people like her don't wait for invitations once they have information. They don't need your consent when they believe the situation entitles them." Leora stared at the envelope, breathing slowly now, like her body was trying to settle into a new reality. "So if I told her," she whispered again, the words cracking at the end. I stepped closer, close enough that she could see I wasn't guessing. I wasn't dramatizing. I wasn't trying to scare her for control. I was trying to tell her the truth with the tenderness it deserved. "You wouldn't be sitting here," I said. I let the sentence hang, not as a threat, but as a fact. Leora's lips parted, her eyes widening slightly, as if a door in her mind had opened, and she could see through it. Now lawsuits, pressure, manipulation framed as love. Her husband caught between loyalty and convenience, her being urged to do the right thing until she couldn't tell right from surrender. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in grief. "They would have swallowed me," she murmured. I nodded. "They would have tried," I said. "And they would have used your kindness to do it." Leora sat down on the edge of my bed, hands trembling. "I don't know what to do now," she said. And there it was, the real fear, not the inheritance, not the papers, the marriage, the picture she had painted in her mind that now had cracks running through it. "I married him yesterday," she whispered, "and today his mother came to my grandmother's house with a notary." She said it like she couldn't believe she was repeating her own life. I sat beside her, not touching her yet, letting her sit inside the truth long enough to own it. "You don't have to decide out of panic," I said, "but you do have to decide." Leora's jaw tightened. She wiped her cheeks again, slower this time, and when she lifted her head, there was something hard in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I need to go back out there," she said, voice steadier. "And I need to say something." When we walked back into the living room, nothing looked the same, even though every object was still in its place. Deline stood near my dining table with her purse clutched tight under her arm, the papers stacked in front of her like a claim she was refusing to release. Harold hovered close, jaw set. Evan had shifted fully toward the door, half-turned, ready to leave and pretend he'd never been here. Julian stood between them and Leora, but not like a shield, more like a man caught in the middle of two worlds, unsure which one would keep him safe. Leora stepped past me without hesitation. Her shoulders squared, her face still damp from tears, but her eyes clear and steady. She didn't look at the papers first. She looked at her husband. "Julian," she said quietly, not angry, not pleading, just calling him into the moment he'd tried to avoid. Julian swallowed. "Leah," he started, but his voice fell apart halfway through because there was nothing soft enough to fix what he'd allowed. Deline cut in fast, her composure snapping back into place like a practiced act. "Sweetheart," she said, "we don't have to do this here. You're emotional. We'll talk later." Leora lifted her hand, palm outward, a small gesture that stopped Delphi mid-sentence. The silence that followed was loud. Deline stared at her, offended in a way only entitled people get offended that someone younger had dared to set a boundary. Leora didn't flinch. "No," she said simply. "You came to Grandma's home. You brought a notary to her dining table. So, we're finishing this here." Harold shifted his voice low in warning. "Now listen." Leora turned her gaze to him, calm and unafraid. "I am listening," she said. "That's the problem." I listened. Evan scoffed once, trying to lighten it. "This is being blown out of proportion." Leora didn't even look at him. "You were ready to watch me sign something I hadn't read," she replied, still calm. "So don't talk to me about proportion." Julian's face tightened, shame creeping up his neck. He stepped forward slightly, finally trying. "Babe," my mom thought. "She didn't think," Leora cut in, and this time her voice sharpened just enough to draw blood. "She planned." Deline's smile returned, small and cold. "You're accusing me of protecting you?" she asked, the words smooth but the tone cruel. Leora nodded once. "Yes," she said, "because protection doesn't show up unannounced with a notary." That sentence landed like a door slamming in Delphine's face. Harold's lips pressed together. Evan's eyes darted, searching for an exit that didn't look like retreat. Julian's shoulders sagged as if he was finally feeling the weight of what silence costs. Deline leaned forward, voice lowering into something sharper, less polished. "You're a Carter now," she said, as if the name itself was a leash. "You don't get to treat this family like strangers." Leora's gaze didn't move. "I'm not treating you like strangers," she replied. "I'm treating you like people who showed me who they are." Deline's eyes flashed. "So what? You're going to embarrass your husband on day one?" Leora's chin lifted. "You embarrassed him when you trained him to stand silent?" she said, and Julian flinched like she'd slapped him without raising a hand. I watched my granddaughter in that moment and felt something inside me settle a quiet, final relief. Not because she was winning a fight, because she was choosing herself. Leora reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Deline stiffened instantly. "Put that away," she snapped. "This is private." Leora didn't press record. She didn't call the police. She didn't do anything dramatic. She simply opened her messages and typed one sentence with steady hands, then turned the screen toward Deline so she could see she wasn't bluffing. "I've contacted Mary and Ellis," Leora said quietly. "The trustee will be notified of today's attempt." Harold's face went hard. Evans swore under his breath. Julian stared at the phone like it was a weapon. Deline's composure cracked again, not into panic this time, but into something colder calculation. "You wouldn't," she said, voice low. "You'll hurt your own husband." Leora's eyes held hers. "You already tried to," she replied. Then she stepped closer to the table, picked up the stack of papers, and slid them toward Deline with 2 fingers. "Take your formalities and leave," she said. "You don't get another visit." Deline's breath shook once, controlled. She snatched the papers, shoved them into her bag, and turned toward Julian. "Come," she ordered. Julian hesitated. For the first time, he didn't move instantly. His eyes met Leora's, pleading. Leora didn't soften. She didn't harden either. She just stood there, waiting for him to choose. Julian swallowed, then stepped backward, not toward his mother, but toward the door. I need time," he murmured, voice small. Deline's head snapped toward him. "Time?" she hissed. "After everything we've done," Julian's shoulders stiffened. "I saw what you did," he said, barely audible. Harold's eyes widened. Evan looked away. Deline's face twisted with rage she couldn't fully show in my home. She spun toward the door, Harold and Evan following, and left without another word. The door closed behind them softly, but the quiet that followed was different now. It wasn't practiced. It was earned. Leora exhaled slowly like she'd been holding her breath since the wedding. Julian stood near the doorway, hands shaking slightly, looking at the floor as if he was finally seeing the mess he'd helped create. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I walked to my small cabinet, opened it, and placed the old envelope back inside the copies. The notes, the warnings written in my own hand. Then I turned the key, locked it, and closed the cabinet door gently. Leora watched me do it, and in her eyes I saw the understanding settle. Silence didn't just save money. Silence saved her. I crossed the room and took her hand at last, squeezing once. No speech, no celebration, just a quiet promise between 2 women who had learned the same lesson in different generations. The legacy survived because we didn't hand it out with smiles. It survived because we kept it sealed until we knew who deserved to stand near it. I walked to the front door, turned the lock, and let the latch fall into place with a soft final click.